All right, welcome back to the olliegolf.com podcast. I'm your host and founder, David Igono. Today I have on the show Michael Alexis. He's a lawyer from Canada that has conducted well over 100 interviews. Michael, how are you doing today?
Great, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Now, I just said that you're from Canada. Are you a big hockey guy?
I'm not, no. And ironically, I'm not a big golf guy either. So we'll do our best to talk away from sports and very much on the topic of interviewing.
Well, and the cool thing about that, I mean, at first listening, you hear that like, why are you interviewing him? But one of the things that I'm learning the more and the more I chase adventure and the more I chase out expertise and knowledge is that even though certain things may not be in the same sphere as far as comfort or interest, they have a lot of the same foundational values. So what you learn in, let's say, golf or hockey or business school can be directly applied just as far as the simple concepts and tenets in interviewing or running a grocery store or freelancing. So I'm more than excited to get this interview kicked off, and we're going to talk about interviewing experts, people of success and import, and also connecting, because I feel it's a topic that is very, very key to climbing that ladder, whether it's ambition or power or success or responsibility. So, Michael, if you're ready, let's dig in.
Born ready.
All right. So you've interviewed well over 100 types of people. What are some of the high-powered? You don't have to name names. What are some of the interviews that you personally are intrigued by that you've done in the last couple years?
Yeah, I've done three main categories of interviews. So one was interviewing other lawyers. That was when I was in school. I wanted to find out what kind of lawyer I want to be, and what better way than reaching out to criminal lawyers, business lawyers, human rights lawyers, anybody in all kinds of industries. The second was writers and bloggers, and the third was actually doing private interviews for case studies. So in each of those categories, I can think of one or two that really stand out to me. In the law interviews, I learned a lot more about this industry than I think most students. So, for example, I interviewed a criminal lawyer, and he said, well, it's a tough job, but what really keeps me going is when I get those phone calls at 2 a.m. and my client's in prison. And I heard that, and I was like, no way, that's not me. Versus, I talked to a tax lawyer who's all about like numbers and logic and trying to get the greatest financial benefit for the client, and I dig that. So, some of the interviews there were very, very good insight into the industry. And actually, for anybody listening, maybe you don't want to start a website like OllieGolf or Writerviews or Mixergy or anything like this, but doing private interviews is a fantastic way to learn. Second category, so interviews with writers and bloggers. By far, the leading one there was my first and actually second interviews with Ramit Sethi. If you get the chance to talk to Ramit for 10 minutes, it will change your life. I talked to him for altogether over 2 hours. And again, break those down into 10-minute segments. The way that I approach writing is completely different. The way that I approach connecting with people is completely different. The way that I approach business and selling and marketing and all of these things is completely different, because that was such a foundational conversation. If you're interviewing, you might not be able to get guests like that right away, but it's something to work towards for sure. And then finally, the private interviews, the case studies. There were interviews I did in there that kind of different than the other two. I mean, like knowledge and learning aside, just really great personal connections. People that I've stayed connected with, that we talk regularly and kind of motivate each other and keep everybody going. So, yeah, a lot of good value comes out of interviews.
Yeah, I mean, I have two major points I want to just respond with. I 100% agree. Before I started interviewing people, people. Before I started interviewing experts and people who were experiencing success, I was so petrified of like, I mean, who am I? What do I have to offer? And that took a season of, you know, beating out of me and just going for it. I think that's where having a sports or entrepreneurial background has aided me in the sense that I don't think that, you know, I'm afraid, but when you've never done it before, you don't know what to brace for, if you will. But it's something that if you just take the leap and you start interviewing people that you're interested in and that you can learn from, it's very, very transformational. The second thing I'll say is that you mentioned Ramit. Now, your interview with Ramit on Writer Views, I mean, I don't know if I can articulate without sounding very, very, very suspicious, but I have listened to that interview at least 10 times. And the thing about it is that one of Ramit's tenets is that, you know, be very careful who you listen to, be very careful who you follow. And that interview, I mean, in my RSS feeder, I still have Writer Views there, and obviously, I don't believe you still do or post interviews on that site. But I've listened to that interview over 10 times, and each time it's almost like, oh crap, I'm veering away from what what was said in that interview, and it's just it's I would say it's one of the top 5 interviews that I listen to on a regular basis because the amount of knowledge that was in that interview. And I'm saying that, and I've purchased courses from Ramit. It's not like I am, dare I say, a newbie or a virgin to his material. I know Ramit for the past 4 or 5 years, just as far as what I'm going to get. But that interview is the best interview I've ever heard with him. So definitely check that out, writerviews.com. I forget the exact title of that interview with Ramit, but transformational by far, I have to say.
I am honored, thank you. You know, I'd like to shift the credit to Ramit on that one because he does give such phenomenal information, but maybe I'll take a little bit too and say that, I did prepare a lot to make sure that we could get the value out of that hour. Which I'm sure we'll talk about in this interview. And just as far as your listeners finding it goes, Writer Views, the videos aren't up there anymore. Now they're all posted on my personal website. So if they go to michaelalexis.com and sign up for the email list, they'll get instant access to that interview and a couple of others that I really liked. Or if they don't want to sign up, that's okay too. They can just go to michaelalexis.com/welcome.
Awesome. Now we're talking about interviewing, and I mentioned some of the fears or the dare I say invisible barriers that I put up and other people put up in their minds. How do you even decide upon somebody to interview? Is it something where you just Google people in your field, or let's break down that interview / preparation process that you've mastered in your well over 100 interviews?
So with Writer Views, it actually happened in phases. I mean, this is something you get good at over time. At first I just said, I'm going to interview successful writers, which is a very broad category, right? It means bloggers, it means journalists, it means authors, it means all kinds of people that write, copywriters, etc. But I found over time that niching it down was more popular for the audience. There was a common thread between the last dozen or so interviews I did, which is that they were all bloggers, and that meant that somebody that came and watched the one with Ramit was probably going to come back and watch the one with Neil Patel, and was probably going to come back and watch Anna Hoffman or Derek Halpern or any of these other people that I had on the show. So, as a first step to deciding who you want to interview, niche down a notch. This isn't meant to be a consultation. I'm not throwing out advice or anything, but I know that you interview successful people in the sports industry, golfers, etc. I'd wonder if maybe you could niche that down even further to get golfers that are popular in the U.S. or the Northeast U.S. Not with the idea that you'd stay there forever, but somebody who comes and listens to an interview with one of those golfers is probably going to know the other names as well. It's something to think about.
No, it makes sense.
Niche down first, and then as far as specifically who you interview, I went for the top of mind people first. They were blogs that I read and I was aware of. I did research for things like, top 10 bloggers or, bloggers to watch in 2011 or whatever it was. And that was a way that came up. If you want accessible people that are very likely to say yes, find people that have done interviews before. Neil Patel and Ramit, etc., Derek are great examples. They're all over the place in the blogging world. And, another interview, another couple of links to their site is something that they're generally willing to spend a little bit of time on. And then I guess the only other advice I would have is try to connect with people that you can relate to. And by that I mean there's a lot of people in the blogging world who are kind of scammy, spammy, whatever. People like that I just wouldn't have a productive, good conversation with. I think, they may or may not have things to teach us, but it's not something that I would personally enjoy. And I think if you're going to do this and stay committed to this, you ought to enjoy it.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest, with my site, I have just went after success, and I know that there's probably 2 or 3 levels more of niching down that I can do. And there's a certain power in, once you're very clear with your interviews and your message, that allows you to expand after that, which is, I would say, it's counterintuitive. We all have this mentality. I call it the Walmart mentality. I don't know how much Walmart has crept into Canada or the rest of the world, but it's where I want to sell everything so that everybody will come and talk to me. But that's not necessarily how it goes when you're honestly searching out knowledge. And that kind of leads me to one of the last things you said, as far as connecting with people you can relate to. I think connecting is a word that it's so watered down in our vernacular nowadays that we almost group it with networking and just talking with people and social media and what have you. But I believe it's very, very powerful in the sense that when you're interviewing somebody that's in a slightly different world, whether it's golf or
Are we still connected?
you should go to people that yes, we are.
Oh, sorry, it just spaced out for a second there.
Oh, we're good. Good. Did you hear my last
the last
question?
2 sentences, if you can repeat them.
Yeah, so you were mentioning how you should connect with people that you can relate to. I mean, let's be honest. A lot of these people are either titans in their field, or they're very, very expertise laden, and they're not necessarily. I wouldn't say that we're reaching out to them cold, but we're trying to develop a connection. How have you done that? How have you connected with people, with experts who aren't necessarily on your wavelength at the start?
Yeah, so 4 things to keep in mind. The first one, and you've covered this already, is connect upwards. I think the people that you want to start building these relationships with are the ones that are on the ladders above you. If you want to keep moving up, etc., and if you want to learn from them. There's a lot of people who, when they connect and network, etc., will go and meet a lot of other people at the same level of them. And that's okay, if you want to be social, if you want people that you can kind of grow with. But in my experience, this sounds a little bit sinister, but the benefit comes from connecting upwards. I don't think that's necessarily, or that's a bad thing. As far as doing that, yeah, don't be afraid. Get over your fears. People generally want to hear from you. If you're sending a quick email and it's something that can benefit them, if you are going to interview them and post a link or help them promote their site or anything like this, they're at least willing to consider it. The worst that they can say is no or ignore you or whatever, and that's not actually all that bad. I've called some people in the past cold calls, and they've said much worse than no. People can get very, very offended when you interrupt their day, but fair enough. We get to move on our own paths, and they get to move on their own, which may or may not be miserable. But overcoming that initial fear to reach out is important. 2, when you do it, don't ramble. Busy people don't want to read, 3, 4, 5, 6 paragraphs, hundreds of words essay. Make it like as minimal as possible. When I email Ramit to this day, or some of the other busy successful people that I'm connected with, it's like 4 sentences max, and each of those sentences has been carved down to the only words that have to be there to convey what I want. So, don't dance around it. If you want to interview somebody, say, hi Michael, can I interview you on specific date via Skype or phone or whatever it happens to be? Maybe one line about how they know about me or something that relates to me. You're like, oh, I'm a lawyer too, and I would like to learn about whatever it happens to be. And then, if that time doesn't work for you, please just another or whatever. Just keep it very, very, very short, and people are more likely to respond. Getting that first response is key to connection. Going from there, this is kind of another deeper, more inside thing, is you need to treat everybody as an equal, but not as an equal to you. So what I mean by that is, it's you and all of the other people in the world. All the other people in the world are equal, and you should respect and look up to. And then you are just a little bit below them. That, for me, in the past has meant, I talked to Ramit, I talked to Neil, I talked to Derek, I talked to CEOs that I've met, I've talked to well-known journalists and people in the media, the exact same way that I talk to a guy that owns a fruit shop in a tiny little town in China. It's just gives people, I think, a certain amount of comfort with you when you're not putting them on a pedestal, or even worse, putting them below you, and that really helps to build a long-term connection. You can imagine that some of these well-known names we've reached out to, they get a lot of people that kind of pander to them, and they some of them might want that. Some people might like the fame and the spotlight, etc., but others are just humble, genuine people, and when you connect with them on a friendly level, I think it's going to go a lot further. They're going to want to spend more time with you.
Yeah, that was the one word that I thought of in my mind, pandering. And pandering is something that, I'll be honest, sometimes I got to make sure that I'm not pandering. But when you treat somebody as an equal, you tend to talk to them in a manner that is comforting. Not trying to exaggerate or anything like that, or be over the top, but you wanna make them comfortable. And that's one thing that I think that you're a master at, is you make your guests comfortable. I can't tell you how many times where I've started off an interview and you can feel that palpable tension of like, okay, what's going on? What am I supposed to answer? And then I ask a question or I make a comment and I can hear the relief in their voice. I have some of my methods. How important is that first question, remark that you make in an interview in making your guest comfortable?
It's funny. You of course sent me some of the interview questions before we started. I printed them out. I looked at that first one. How important is the first question? I just left it and I went and filled out the rest. And I came back to it and realized that the reason I had left it blank was because it is so important. And I was looking the best way to articulate that. You know, the difference between like a tense or standoffish interview to one that is not even just comfortable, but like ignited, passionate, is huge. So there's two things that I do to make that happen. One is with less experienced interview guests. For example, in the case studies I did, a lot of people, that was the first time they'd ever been interviewed. I start with really basic stuff, just bio details. It gives them a chance for the tension to kind of ease off. They, get confidence from being able to answer the questions. And it's, how old are you? Where are you from? What do you do? This kind of thing that we all know how to answer. And then once, you're right, I mean, that palpable tension, it lifts, you recognize that cue, and then you can start getting into the deeper stuff, and people will really open up to you. With more experienced interview guests, or when you're looking for that more substantive information right away, I would look for emotional triggers. And let me give you a few specific examples of that. When I interviewed Trent Ham, who is a writer on The Simple Dollar, his first 40 minutes or so of the interview was pretty standoffish. It didn't seem like he wanted to be talking to me. We were talking about his site, which is about personal finance. We were talking about money management, his tenets and rules that he teaches people, and he just wasn't into it until I asked about what's behind the scenes. What do you do evenings, weekends, etc. And it turns out that he's a family man. He's got at that time a couple of kids that are his world, and you could see him light up. And for the last 15-20 minutes of the interview, it was an entirely different vibe, right? It was passionate, It was energetic, it was great. So I learned from that. Two more examples. So Neil, same kind of thing. Like first 60-70% of the interview was pretty slow. For a different reason, I think Neil likes to talk, but he was just tired. That man works a lot.
Yes, he does.
When I asked him about, when I stopped asking about writing and I started asking about sales, that's when he got on fire, because that's what Neil likes to do. When he could tell the audience about, how he gets all these phone calls with big companies and works his way up to, the decision makers and closes, multi 500,000 plus deals. That's what Neil wants to talk about. Again, totally different tone. And same with the Ramit interview. You've listened to it 10 plus times. There's one question in the interview where I asked Ramit about his writing process, right? How does he produce so much content in such high quality? And again, he just lit up. And it went from, a professional interview. Ramit's been all over so many media sources. He's done media training. He's got a very professional tone. But that question kind of broke through to the genuine Ramit, the Ramit that wants to joke around a little bit and share something a little bit more intimate. Writing process. How intimate is that? Well, to some of us it is, and for him it was. So those are the two things that I'd recommend. One, make novice guests comfortable with bio questions. More experienced guests, try to find that emotional trigger point. How do you do that? It's easier when they publish online, right? It's always easier to do your research when somebody publishes online. But look for, what do they do when they're not working? Maybe they like kiteboarding, maybe they're a traveler, maybe they cook. But there's something behind the scenes that's unrelated to their work or their writing. Find out what they do on weekends, find out what their family's like, find out who they spend their time with, what kind of movies they go to. I don't know. It's gonna be something personal like that that's gonna let you create a really great connection and a stellar interview.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking of your interview with Ramit, and I mean, honestly, I think there was at least 4 or 5 questions where he let's just say, got off the beaten path. I remember the question about how he got into college. Just his essay writing for scholarships, his system that he created for that. When you guys were talking about Amazon book codes, I mean, it's one of those things where when you can, and I want to say serve, but I think that word is very vague. When you can set up your guest to be themselves in their full glory, and they can sense that you're setting them up, I think that's when the interview shifts from, like you said, from being professional to being not only professional but a personal conversation.
Totally. Let's go deeper into that example that you just gave, because I think it highlights an important point. So in the conversation with Ramit, something came up about his book and selling it on Amazon, etc. Ramit made the comment that if somebody interviews him or if somebody links to his site, he would love it if that person links with his affiliate ID on Amazon. Ramit doesn't care about the extra $1.50 or whatever he's going to get for the book, but it's that extra level of detail, that extra level of respect that he goes for. So because I had done my research very well, I was able to respond right away and say, for the listeners, Ramit's Amazon affiliate code is IWTBR-20. I would teach to be rich-20. I don't know why I still know that 3 years later, but but again, that's the level of research you have to do if you want to have a great interview with one of these people.
Yeah, I mean I mean, and I don't want to make this into a Ramit,
yeah, of course,
Ramit safety interview, but I think that sort of points to the man and to his work in the sense that there's a lot of good there. You don't want, if you're going to interview people, whether it's for your benefit or it's for a site or whatever, you want disproportionate results. You don't want another Me Too podcast, another Me Too blog. Well, let me rephrase that. I don't want that. I can't think of a lot of people wanting that. If you want to make an impact, you have to go to that extra level, and you have to find a way to connect, because it's almost like, hopefully this metaphor isn't too crazy, but there's that professional shroud of, okay, let me disseminate my knowledge and let me share with you, my process and my journey so far. But there's almost so much, I would say, double, triple, exponential behind when you connect. When somebody trusts you, especially when we're talking about connection, when you're trusted, it's a whole different ballgame. It's a completely different ballgame. And I think that trust comes with being allowing your guests to be comfortable, but it also comes with putting in the work well ahead of time, like you're saying.
Totally.
Now, we talked about, obviously, the great interviews that you've done. Let's talk about some of the, I don't want to say negative, but some of the more blah interviews that you've done, whether they were case studies and I'm not trying to disrespect the content or the guest, but in your experience, some of the non-transformational interviews that you've done, what were your key takeaways as far as like, okay, I will make sure I don't ask that question again. Okay, I'll make sure that my guests always know X. Do you have any of those type of takeaways from your, let's just say, not as transformational interviews?
Let's take it to a slightly different angle, which is something you'll find when you do a lot of interviews is that, some guests who, generally they've done it before, will give you really clear, concise answers. They can also, see your question and the next questions that will follow and create a really good thread of information. Other people will ramble forever. And what I've found is that you can't be afraid to interrupt them. I remember I interviewed one guy. He was a newscaster in, I believe it was Philadelphia, for 30 or 40 years or something like this. And he talked and he talked and he talked, and I didn't get to ask him all of my questions. And he was one of these people where it was just like blocks and blocks of information. It was good, but it was too much coming. I didn't get to dig deep. I didn't get to follow up on the little threads that I was interested in that I thought were relevant for my audience. And what was funny was at the end of that interview, this guy, he was a newscaster, he had plenty of experience doing interviews. At the end of it, he said, "Michael, you should have interrupted me." And I went, well, what the heck? And that's one thing. Another kind of, maybe this is more of a pet peeve, is something that I think makes an interview not good is when more than one person is talking at the same time. And by that I usually mean like active listening type, right? So if I was going off on my spiel right now and you, David, were going, yes, it makes it like really difficult to listen to when they're happening at those same times. Now, it's not like I'm a hard ass. I know that some of those just kind of come out naturally and that this is a conversation we're recording, etc. I think that's okay, but some people really overdo it.
Yeah, that's it's funny. Now that you mentioned that, I'll probably harp on myself mentally on that a little bit more, which I don't think it's a bad thing. I think that those preferences, even if they're small, I think it does pave the way to a great interview. One of the things that you just mentioned was, well, actually, let me rephrase this. What makes a great interview? Is it just the content? Is it just the guest? Is it just the questions that you ask? What makes a great interview in your experience?
I think a great interview is going to change in context. So depending on what your goal is. My goal with, for example, the Writer Views interviews was to educate people about how to become a better writer. So the best way I could do that, I felt, was doing how-to interviews, step by step, from start to finish, how you promote a blog, or how you get a lot of traffic from social media, or how you sell products online, or something like this. So a great interview would be one that lays that out from start to finish. Something that, like, if you packaged it up as a product, could sell for a lot of money. Not just, random tangents all over the place. So that kind of coherency, consistency. Contrast that with Andrew Warner's Mixergy. He has two sections of his site now, essentially. One is he does kind of premium training courses where successful entrepreneurs will come on and teach a very specific, usually how-to thing, similar to the coach I had. But on his general program, the interviews that you'll find on Mixergy.com are more about stories, right? What are all the connecting points for these really successful entrepreneurs? He's had on, the founder of Groupon and Wikipedia, Airbnb, etc. It's, focusing on stories. So I think a great interview for him would be one where he's shown his audience that these people that he's interviewing are just that. They're people just like them. That it's something that they can aspire to, but also achieve. I don't want to speak for Andrew, but I think that would be a great interview for him. And any number of other categories could have their own definition.
And that actually brings up an interesting thought I just had. It's not in my notes. A how-to approach compared to a more, I'm just going to say, storyboard approach. Can you mix and match the two? I mean, you did mention that it's about the context, but is there do you shoot for a narrative, or do you just shoot straight for the content, the end game?
Yeah. So the first question, we're going to keep going back to the Ramit interview. All right. The first question I asked Ramit, I believe, was, how did you get started writing? There is a how-to component to that, right? But actually, for most people, Ramit's first step to becoming a writer wouldn't be relevant, because in his case, it was, he was like 12, 13 years old. His parents, whenever he would ask them questions or whenever he had an idea, they'd say, write it up. That's not something that you can replicate with a how-to guide. So Yeah, I mean, having narrative, I think, creates interest. It makes it appealing for people to listen to. It gives them a little bit more of that inside information. I think the easiest way to achieve that is chronological, right? Chronological stories are easy to follow, make sense to people, are easier for you to research, etc. You know, somebody interviewing me about my story could go back as far as you know, maybe university and then becoming a lawyer and the time that I've spent in China and some internet entrepreneurship, etc. You know, it doesn't, there's connecting dots. And if you can connect those while talking about, you know, how do you build a successful law practice or something like this, it can have a lot of impact. Yeah. Stories are what people relate to. And when people hear elements that are common to their lives, then they're going to get a lot more out of it.
Yeah, I totally agree. Now, whether you're going for a more narrative-based approach or you're shooting for almost a how-to guide approach, how do you come up with questions? Is it more so, I've been told by various writers, you do the show and tell? I'm sorry, show but don't tell? Or is it one of those things where you sort of, dare I say, dumbed into it, where you ask questions because you wanted to know and there was gold in the answer that you received?
What's that show but don't tell bit you said?
So one of my friends, he's actually the sports editor at our local paper. You know, I asked him when I first started doing interviews, it's like, hey, like, how do I make these interviews just better? He's like, well, he goes, show but don't tell. I was like, what do you mean? He was like, if you know, he goes, whether you're into sports or not, you know that most athletes, if not all athletes, work hard, they prepare hard, they train hard. Okay, but you don't say that. You don't say Michael Jordan is a hardworking athlete. That's not how you show it. Okay, you show it by saying Michael Jordan practices 1,000 3-pointers a day from the left from the left arc during the off season. He also cycles 3 days a week. You know, like, it's more so you show that he's hardworking, but you don't say that he's hardworking. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's I think that'd be an important thing to keep in mind for some types of interviews. You know, if you're a sportscaster, I think your goal is to make the athletes look good. And in some ways, you could educate people too by saying, okay, you ought to take those 1,000 shots a day if you want to be able to make them. For me, though, I think I have a little bit more of a system, and hopefully more detailed, that people are going to be able to follow. So the starting point for me was always curiosity. You know, I'd look at these people that I wanted to interview and just kind of list off the things that I genuinely wanted to know and haven't found answers for. You know, if you go to a personal finance blog and in the right-hand column it's their 10 golden rules of personal finance, you don't ask them about that because it's accessible for everybody else too. So starting point is, you know, curiosity for questions that don't have, you know, simple answers. The second one, and this is probably the most important, you know, the magic is in follow-up questions. Ones that you prepare in advance and ones that come on the fly. And actually we've seen that even in the interview that we're doing now, right? I mean, you're throwing out additional questions about the narrative and the story, etc., that we didn't plan for, but our follow-up questions that will hopefully have some good insights for the listeners. And once I have that, okay, starting point, curiosity list of questions, list off lots of follow-up questions for each one, then I apply 3 filters. So first filter is this question relevant? You know, if you ask me what time zone I'm in, your audience doesn't care. It's not going to be a really useful thing for them, right? So is this relevant? Second question, is it interesting? I think that for somebody to sit down and listen to half an hour or an hour of this, that every question has to be pretty compelling. So, is it something that is likely going to elicit interesting answer for people? And third, is it likely to be found somewhere else? And I kind of already mentioned that, but if this person gives a lot of interviews and they've answered the same questions, dozens of times, don't ask them those same questions. It's not producing value for anybody. If they've written a book, you don't need to ask them exactly what's in their book. If they're a blogger, same deal. So try to ask them new stuff.
Yeah, I think that last point that you just made is, it's really, really, really cool when you can connect it to a follow-up question. In a sense, I mean, obviously you want to connect everything as much as you can, but what I've learned in the interviews that I've done is that it's a lot like we were talking before, where guys are tired. People are tired. If they're successful, let's be honest, they work hard and they most likely work a lot. So a certain level of the conversation is going to be rote at the outset. But where I've seen my interviews take off is when it's almost like I actually had an interview last summer with a women's basketball coach. This was before I switched to just doing golf specific interviews, and she told me afterwards, she was like, David, I could just sense that you wanted to ask a question, but you didn't ask it. I was like, what do you mean? She was like, you knew the exact next question to ask. Like, I could hear it in your voice. And I'm thinking to myself, this is all audio. I don't know how or what, or if it's that obvious, but I guess that leads us into, the main arc of this conversation as far as connection. When you can connect on a level of asking because of your curiosity and also having good follow-up questions that can't be found by a mere Google search or reading their Wikipedia bio, it puts you in this rarefied air of somebody who actually knows what they're talking about and is curious. And I'm finding that those people are rare, very rare.
Totally. It's funny, interviews and podcasts, etc., have become the new prolific method of creation. So what I mean by that is it's so easy now. The barriers are so low to getting on Skype, recording a call, and posting it online that there's a lot of this and the same out there. So that differentiation point, that personal point, so important.
Yeah, and it kind of rolls into my next question. My next question was, how do you differentiate yourself? How have you personally tried, not just tried, but accomplished differentiation?
So for me, again, it was about those how-to interviews and doing them the best that I could. So I think that separated me from the legions of people that maybe just kind of get on a call and ask a few questions and then let it go. I don't want to speak poorly of anybody, but I recall somebody emailed me and he said, wow, your interview with Neil was so good. How did you get him to talk so long? When I interviewed him, he only talked for 12 minutes. And I went to, okay, well, what happened there? I mean, I know Neil's willing to spend an hour talking. It was all about the follow-up questions in that case. So, for me, what I think differentiated me from a lot of people was, being quick with those follow-up questions, asking good ones, which is a skill you develop over time, and really just going deeper and deeper and deeper into a question until I really understood that. Everything I said was pretty generic. Here's an example. So if your interview guest gives you an answer, so you ask, how do you, it's about health and nutrition. How do you lose weight? Or how do you have clear skin? Or how do you have any of these things that people want? And they say, oh, well, blah, 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 you ought to eat, 3 times a day. And ask them just like, give me a specific example. Give me a specific example of, one of your clients or one of your readers, or even for you, or just ask for specifics, and people usually bring them out. And that's kind of a go-to follow-up question for me. What are the specifics here?
Yeah, I mean, and I'll be very honest right now. The follow-up question, I've been told many times that, wow, how did you come up with that question? And I'm just like, it wasn't in my notes. I just went for it. And a lot of times when you go for a follow-up question, it's because you're mentally present. You're in that interview and you're actually learning. One of the craziest things that I've learned, I mean, once you get past higher education and you learn on your own, you self-educate yourself, whether it's by reading books or podcasts or I don't know, running a business, failing a business, what have you. You learn that a lot of the times the journey or the conversation is more important than what you came there for. And that part is so tricky. It's so subtle, and you can't always tap into the knowledge that is on the other line unless you're all there. And when you're all there, that's when you come up with a question that is, it seems small or minor as it leaves your mouth, but the guest on the other hand, whether it's like you're saying, just that specific example, and that specific example that they give you is like, there's no way. It wasn't even, I mean, I've had I like to do interview outlines because it just keeps me, honest as far as, order. And there's been so many times where I'm just like, I'm not even halfway through this interview, but this interview is awesome right now because we're going there, quote unquote. And there is that place where there's specific, actionable items, but there's also a narrative there that makes it so entertaining. I don't know if that makes sense to you, but that's like the juice for me in an interview is when I am asking the teacher, the guest on the other line, what's going on or how they did X, and they share it in such a way that is, dare I say, just it's awesome, and it's not by chance most of the time.
Totally. You praised me earlier. You told me that you had listened to the one interview 10 times. And let me return the favor. I think this has been a great interview too. I can tell that you prepared well for it. I can tell that you're totally present. It makes a big difference. Specifics for how listeners can do the same if that's not something that comes naturally to them is I try to repeat what the guest said. Not word for word, but if I just gave you, 3-4 big mouthfuls about how to do something, then you as the interviewer can say, okay, so, to be a better writer, you should do these 3 things, list them off and then move on. And it shows me that you're listening, it shows the audience that you're listening, and it shows yourself that you're listening too. It keeps you kind of keen and on the ball.
That's awesome. And it's something that I have to write down and make sure, repeat. Yeah, I mean, you've interviewed, let's just say, at least 2 or 3 different cross sections of expertise. And I don't know about you. I mean, I'm new to the golf scene, and a lot of times when they're talking to me, I'm just like, I need to repeat what you just said so I can buy time to write it down, so I can.
Yeah, totally.
So there's a lot of, there's a lot of listening and repeating that makes it functional. Now, one of the coolest things that you said in this interview that I might even make it the background on top of my my iPhone is connect upwards. Now that sounds very, let's just say, self-fulfilling. You're looking out for your own good, but I think that when you use it in a context that is value driven, and it's not with a scarcity mindset. You're not doing it just so that you can be improved by it, but you're doing it so that you can improve your product, your offering, your platform, your interview, whatever. It's really, really, really transformational. I mean, I have written down here what's more influential, the interview or the connection. I have my personal opinion, and it's sort of a hybrid of the two. But when we're talking about connecting upward, because I don't care if you are a college golf coach in the Midwest of the United States. I don't care if you're starting a blog on golf fashion. I don't care if you want to start a blog about writing, or whatever, or you have whatever you want to do. You can't really. Let me rephrase that. You can expedite and exponentially increase your power, your reach, and your voice by connecting with people. So that was a mouthful, but in your experience, what is the influence, the impact that you look for?
I believe the connection is more, in hindsight, the connection has been more important to me. So when I was doing writer reviews, it was all about the interviews. I didn't think I was going to build, relationships with Ramit, Derek, etc., Andrew. It was, I'm going to record these interviews and I'm going to put them online, and I hope a lot of people will watch them and learn from them. But fast forward 2 or 3 years later, and well, you David, you're still listening to my interviews, but I don't know if anybody else is.
Oh yeah,
the connection really has lasted though. So, okay, interviewed Ramit, maybe that brought 4,000 people to the website, but the connection was, meant over $30,000 of revenue for my business. It's meant opportunities to connect with other people who have become close friends and confidants, and people very important in my life. It's meant self growth. Again, a 10-minute conversation with that man will change your life. So I think for me, again, in hindsight, the connection has been so much more important than just the interview.
Now, I mean, and that's how I feel. I feel like there's at least 4 or 5 people I've interviewed in the past month or so that I'm just like, where in the world did I can't believe this came out of like a cold email. I mean, you talked about reaching out by email earlier in this interview, and when you connect with somebody and you connect on a level that is past what can you do for me or vice versa, it opens doors that are let's just say they're the doors that you want to open. Is there another example? I know we talked a lot about Ramit. Is there another example as far as you've connected with the interview guest? I want to go there as far as like on a, maybe not a personal, I mean, you don't have to give out, too crazy details, but is there like a former interview guest that you talk to on a very regular basis? I understand. I think the audience understands that, you talk to somebody like Ramit Sethi, and there's I don't want to call it a windfall, but there's immediate impact that is scalable over time. Is there another example of somebody that you've interviewed to that effect?
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier doing sort of private case study interviews, and I've done plenty of those. That's led to probably these regular connections with maybe half a dozen people, not a ton, but 2 really stand out. My friends Julia and Natalie, and we'll Skype when we need to. We'll send emails back and forth when we need to, and that's proven to be a great support group. I gotta talk a little bit ill about my close friends, but not in a bad way. So my friends that I grew up with are, well, to me, the best people in the world, but they've chosen a different path. They've chosen the path where they, get married, get a job, settle down, buy a house, etc. Versus, the conversations that I have with Julia and Natalie. Some of the other people I've connected with through interviews are, entrepreneurial and personal growth, and how do we keep moving forward, which is something that's so valuable, to have people to bounce those ideas and thoughts off of. That's awesome. That kind of leads me into the last
concept. There's a lot of little questions, but the last concept that I wanted to talk about with you, and that is the challenge, the inner challenge that we all take on in our lives, whether it's entrepreneurial or it's career or it's sports or it's family or relationship. We all aspire to a certain degree. How do you challenge yourself as an interviewer? How do you answer the bell time in, time out, and not just in the interview per se, but as far as why am I doing this?
Right. I'm gonna try to answer this in a more general way first, then maybe I can narrow it down. Whenever I want to kind of challenge myself, improve, get better at something, motivation is good, but it only lasts so long. Whereas systems and processes stick around. So, for example, a couple months ago, I wanted to, become more fit, healthy, more energetic, etc. So I put in place 5-day plans. And what I mean by 5-day plans is you literally take a piece of paper and across the top you write day 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. On the left-hand column, so you're making a table, on the left-hand column, you list off the things that you're going to do every single day. So again, getting healthy, that meant, I think day 1 was like 20 minutes of yoga, 30-minute walk, and I wrote something about diet. So for the first 5 days, just making sure you check off every single one of those items. So the three items on that list, and you don't let yourself sleep until they're all done. That's how I challenge myself to get better. 5-day period, just do those 3. Don't modify them. Don't try to get ahead of yourself. The next 5-day period, you make a new list and you put 4 things on it or 5 things on it, or you increase yoga from 30 minutes to an hour, or maybe you didn't really enjoy walking, so you take that off and you replace it with push-ups or whatever you want. But by having a piece of paper with check marks on it, I am remarkably more productive than I am if I'm just relying on my inner determination.
Yes, that's that inner determination. I like to call it the the North American pseudo manifesto. We all, Western culture, we all believe that we're so powerful and we can do whatever we want if we set our minds to it. That's what we're taught, as children. But it's been proven time and time again that we have to make actionable steps, and a lot of times those actionable steps are small. They're checking off, a list. They're so minute, but at the same time, if we don't do them and we rely on the fact that we feel guilty and we want to work out, then it doesn't always come off. I want to make a minor sidebar here because I think it kind of meshes neatly with challenging yourself. So yesterday I was reading. I don't know if you've heard of James Altucher. He's a very I'm going to use the word eccentric as a praise and just a huge bucket to put his all of him into, because I think that's the only way to do it justice. And he was writing yesterday about how he interviewed Biz Markie, the rapper from let's just say the 80s. But the coolest thing about his writing at the very end, or his post yesterday, was he was like, life is about 3 things as far as ambition goes. And this is obviously me paraphrasing. It's about money, mastery, and meaning. And we all try, obviously money, the money part of it, we all want, we all go after. We spoke earlier in this, before we started recording, I think, just about, making a profit, making money. But the other 2 are just as huge. So when we're talking about challenging ourselves, we're talking about going after that inner ideal person, or I almost said plateau subconsciously, but that inner peace that we're looking for in our careers or our ambitions. I guess my question to you is sort of an abstract question, but of those 3 things, money, mastery, and meaning, where do you see your work gravitating to the most? And obviously, it's almost like a trap to talk about money. I don't think it's a trap at all. I think money is something that when you approach it the correct way, it does open doors, and it allows you to have a perspective that is very, very functional in other areas. But yeah, go with that. What money, master, or meaning? Where do you see your work, whether it's right now in the past or where you want to take it to? Which of those three, or which combination of those three, I should say?
I friggin' love this question because it goes into the point that I expect Altucher was trying to make, which was that we all have to balance these three for ourselves, right? I mean, some people are going to prioritize money over the other two. Some people are going to go deeper into meaning. And actually, for me, that's what it is. Money is great. Okay, yes, we all want to make more money, but at the end of the day, it's just a tool, and it's actually not one that I particularly need more of. Right? I'm very happy to live off of a modest income and can live quite comfortably on it. But what I want is meaning in my life. I want, by the time that I die, to have been able to help a lot of people. We don't need to go too deep into that in this interview, but I want to help children overseas that don't have opportunities, or, in worst case scenarios, actually have harm being done to them on a daily basis. I think this is the worst thing on the planet. So the more money I can make, the more mastery I can create for myself, then the more meaning I can have, at least in my definition of it. And I would, at this point, encourage anybody listening to kind of look deeper inside of themselves to see what they truly want, because I know that when you're stuck in, if you're living paycheck to paycheck, or if you have to make sure you're paying the bills, or if you have kids and other expenses that honestly I don't have yet. I know it can be tougher, but if you can set money aside as a priority in your life, I think you can achieve a lot more. I think you'll be more motivated. I think you'll continue progressing. I think you'll feel more satisfied and peaceful, and all kinds of other benefits. So, yeah, that's me preaching a little bit, but I hope that it's useful for other people.
No, I don't think that's preaching at all. That's sharing. That's sharing at an intimate level of just being honest. And I like how you've kind of flipped the question on me in a sense that, it's a combination of the three, but you have to balance out, in my opinion, and I agree with you have to balance out the first one so you can focus on the other two. And I can't really think of an example ever, when I say ever in the history of ever, where somebody had meaning without being a master at anything. I don't know. Maybe there is one out there, but I totally appreciate it, and I agree with you in that answer. Now, my last final question for you today, and I just want to say, Michael, I really appreciate you just, it's easy to do an interview when you interview other people, I guess. It's easier, maybe is a better way of saying it, but it's always a challenge for me to just be real. And that sounds almost like it's two-faced. It's really not. Sometimes, you have to psych yourself up. You have to get geared up to do an interview. And I have to say, this interview, I've been pumped since Thursday night, Thursday night, Friday morning. And I just truly, truly want to thank you for taking time out in your busy schedule and just having a conversation. I feel like this conversation is very actionable. And I go back to, what you said about the Ramit interview, where it's like there's just 10-minute segments. Just if you look at it that way, you can pull so much out of it. So I truly want to thank you for taking time out to do this interview.
David, it's been my pleasure. I can't think of a better way to spend an hour than chatting with a like-minded person. So thank you.
That's awesome. And I appreciate that. My last question, because I think we have to be very fair and very cognizant of who's listening. And a lot of times the people who are listening they're beginners. They're people who are not necessarily beginners. They have no idea where to start. Maybe it's a better way of saying it. So when it comes to interviewing, when it comes to connecting with people, because that's what you're doing when you're interviewing with somebody. I've heard it. I've read a couple of Jay Abraham's books in the last couple of weeks, and he has a strategy of preeminence where you treat, whether it's a client or a member or an interview guest, you treat them like the best client, guest, friend, whatever they are to you. You treat them as the best person that you will ever encounter, and you do everything in your power to make their experience with you awesome. And that takes me to this. It takes you to a place where you have to treat every guest like, dare I say, the President of the United States of America, or whoever the most powerful person in your realm may be. You want to do right by them. You have to do right by them, or you feel guilty. Let's talk about mentors, or resources. Maybe that might be more applicable, that you've used to not just honestly, outline, piggyback, use some of their techniques or, methods, but you've actually used to become better, and that you constantly go back to, or you check to make sure that, they're up on their game.
Three come to mind. One is Ramit. We don't need to go into that anymore. The second one, Andrew Warner, who again is mixg.com. Andrew is kind of the first connection I had with the internet, creative world or publisher world. I had never read blogs or followed along with podcasts, etc. before I found his. And he's proven to be a mentor for me, both in, watching his interviews, etc., but also in private conversations. He's just a very, honest, hardworking person. I mean, that might make him sound a little bit too simple. He's well beyond that. But no, I've learned a lot from him. A little promo. Andrew, a few months back, released I guess we'd call it a course, a seminar, something like this, called True Mind. And that's actually been transformational for me as well. The premise is, so truemind.com, the premise is, look at all of the negative chatter in your head, your insecurities, Ramit calls them scripts, the stuff that just goes on and on and on about how you aren't good enough, or how you don't have enough, or how you could never do something, or whatever it is. And then, listing those off, countering them, and then coming up with really positive statements. And then there's a process for, reinforcing those each day. That brought a lot of peace of mind for me. I don't mind being vulnerable for a second. I have insecurities just like everybody else does. I compare myself to Ramit at Elon Musk, and I see what these guys are doing and how successful their businesses are, and I say things to myself like, I can never be that decisive, or I can never have that level of impact, which isn't actually true, right? If I look a step deeper, my time will come if I continue. And again, Andrew's True Mind course has been something that balanced out those thoughts in my mind. The negative chatter was always there. The positive reinforcement was always there. But True Mind replaced the negative with the positive and made it forefront. That's an incredibly powerful thing. And then actually, I already mentioned him. The third person is Elon Musk. I look up to him because I see him as, more than anybody else in the world, pursuing projects that can change the world, right? I'm not an engineer. I'm not going to take anybody to space, but I want to have a global impact that will echo through generations. So he's a good man to look up to for that.
Yeah, and I'm trying in my mind to connect those three mentors, or let's just call it beacons, for what it's worth. And I think the cool thing is that they're all slightly different, but they're all pushing you. By you following them or their material, their work, they're pushing you in one direction, an upward direction. And I think that's I guess what I'm trying to say is that we have to understand, just like you were mentioning with your 5-day checklist, you're not going to get it done. You're not going to think about improving your body today and then by tomorrow morning have six-pack abs, run a sub 4 minute mile, mile. You're not going to pull that off. I mean, as much as you may want to, it's just, I don't want to say it's physically impossible. I just want to say it's highly unlikely. But when you focus and you take a methodical approach, and people hear methodical and they think time. Well, time tends to initially not be in your favor when you start something off. But as you focus more on it and as you improve in it, it starts to bend back in your favor. I think those three mentors are immense in that regard as far as pulling you. Maybe that's more what it is in the beginning, just pulling you to where you want to get to.
Totally.
Well, Michael, that's all I have. I mean, I say all I have. That's all. That's all I have outlined for this conversation. I feel like there's definitely more, and the connection that was made, because the interview is only for however much time it's taken. But the connection here, and you said it, when you connect with a like-minded person, I think that's what life is about as far as adventure. I mean, it's awesome. It's awesome to me. Again, thank you for coming on.
My pleasure.
And thank you for everybody else for being a part of it.